Saint Peter. Saint Peter, born Shimon bar Yonah, 1 BC, AD 64-68, also known as Peter the Apostle, Simon Peter, Simeon, Simon, or Cephas, was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ and a foundational leader of the early Christian church. He is prominently featured in all 4 canonical Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, underscoring his central role in the nascent Christian movement. According to both Catholic and Orthodox tradition, Peter is recognized as the first bishop of Rome, regarded as the first pope, and also as the first bishop of Antioch. Peter's leadership is believed to have spanned from AD 30 or 33 until his martyrdom, traditionally dated between AD 64 and 68 under Emperor Nero. This would make him the longest reigning pope in history, presiding for approximately 31 to 38 years, though these dates remain historically unverified. Christian tradition holds that Peter was crucified in Rome, with some accounts specifying that he requested to be crucified upside down, deeming himself unworthy to die in the same manner as Christ. Venerated across all branches of ancient Christianity, Peter is honored as a principal saint and is credited with founding both the Church of Rome and the Church of Antioch. Catholic doctrine upholds that Jesus conferred upon Peter a unique authority, as reflected in passages such as Matthew 16 verses 18 to 19. In the New Testament, the name Simon Peter appears 19 times, and he is portrayed as the brother of Andrew, both of whom were fishermen by trade. The Gospel of Mark is traditionally believed to reflect Peter's eyewitness testimony and preaching. Peter is also referenced in the Pauline epistles, specifically in 1 Corinthians and Galatians, where he is named either Peter or Cephas. 2 epistles, 1 Peter and 2 Peter, are attributed to him, though modern critical scholarship largely questions their direct authorship. Church Father Irenaeus, c. 130, c. 202 AD, in his seminal work Adversus Heresies, Book 3, affirms that Peter and Paul jointly founded and structured the church in Rome, highlighting the apostolic foundation of its authority. Early sources indicate that the terms episkopos, bishop, and presbyteros, elder, were initially used interchangeably, with their roles overlapping significantly. Scholarly consensus suggests that a singular monarchical episcopate in Rome likely did not emerge until the mid-2nd century or later. Beyond the canonical texts, a number of apocryphal writings were later attributed to Peter, such as the Acts of Peter, Gospel of Peter, Preaching of Peter, Apocalypse of Peter, and Judgment of Peter. These works, however, are widely regarded by scholars as pseudepigraphical and not authentic writings of the apostle. The New Testament identifies the original name of the apostle Peter as Simon/Sam/ Greek, Sigmamio Meganu Simon. In 2 notable passages, however, the name appears as Simeon Greek, Sigma a variation believed to reflect a common Jewish practice of the time, assigning a Hebrew name drawn from a revered Old Testament patriarch, Simeon, alongside a similar-sounding Greco-Roman name, Simon. This dual naming convention underscores the cultural intersection in which Peter lived and ministered. Jesus later conferred upon Simon the name Cephas, derived from the Aramaic Kepha, meaning rock or stone. In 9 instances throughout the New Testament, this Aramaic name is preserved as Cephas, while in the overwhelming majority, 156 times, he is referred to as Paitar Petros, the Greek equivalent of rock, adapted with a masculine ending. This name is translated into English as Peter, a title that carries not only linguistic weight, but profound theological significance. The exact nuance of the Aramaic Kepha remains debated. Some scholars interpret it as rock or crag, while others suggest it implies a smaller stone, even extending metaphorically to a jewel when applied to Simon by Jesus, perhaps to emphasize his foundational role and unique character. Most academic consensus, however, holds that as a proper name, Kepha denotes a rugged, strong personality, symbolic of steadfastness and durability. Renowned Catholic theologian Rudolf Pesch proposed that Kepha may have meant precious stone, signifying distinction and value. Nonetheless, this interpretation remains speculative, as evidence for such usage of the Aramaic root kepi is limited, and attestations of it meaning precious stone in contemporary Aramaic sources are virtually non-existent. The composite name Sigma Mu Omega Nu Pi Tau Omicron, Simon Peter, appears 19 times in the New Testament, encapsulating both his given name and his divinely appointed identity. In Syriac Christian texts, his name is often rendered as Simon Cephas, further reflecting the linguistic and theological legacy of this central apostolic figure. Sources on the life of St. Peter. The reconstruction of the life and legacy of St. Peter is grounded in three principal categories of sources, each offering varying degrees of historical, theological, and literary significance. 1. Canonical New Testament writings. These include the Pauline epistles, where the Apostle Paul refers to Peter as both Cephas and Peter, the Petrine epistles 1st and 2nd Peter, which are traditionally attributed to him, though modern scholarship often questions their direct authorship, the canonical Gospels, and the Acts of the Apostles. These foundational texts provide the most authoritative and contemporaneous accounts of Peter's life, ministry, and leadership in the early church. They present him as one of Jesus' earliest and closest disciples, the first to be called, and the foremost among the 12 apostles, appointed directly by Christ. 2. New Testament Apocrypha attributed to Peter. A substantial body of extra-canonical literature bears Peter's name, including texts such as the Gospel of Peter, Preaching of Peter, Acts of Peter and Andrew, Acts of Peter and the 12, Acts of Peter and Paul, the Letter of Peter to Philip, the Letter of Peter to James the Just, the Apocalypse of Peter, and the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. While scholars universally categorize these writings as late pseudepigrapha, with limited historical reliability, they are nonetheless valuable in understanding the evolving theological traditions, devotional expressions, and narrative embellishments surrounding Peter in the early centuries of Christianity. Some may preserve echoes of genuine early traditions. 3. Writings of the Apostolic and Church Fathers. The earliest post-New Testament testimonies regarding Peter are found in the works of the Apostolic Fathers and early Church Fathers, including Papias of Hierapolis, Pope Clement I, Polycarp of Smyrna, Ignatius of Antioch, and Irenaeus of Lyon. These figures, some of whom were direct disciples of the apostles or their immediate successors, offer invaluable witness to the enduring authority, martyrdom, and foundational role of Peter within the developing Christian church, particularly his association with the Church of Rome and his apostolic primacy. In the New Testament narrative, Peter emerges as the first among Jesus' disciples to be called into ministry, and he is consistently portrayed as the chief apostle, ordained personally by Christ to play a foundational role in the establishment and guidance of the early Christian community. Accounts of St. Peter in the Gospels. St. Peter, originally named Simon, was a Jewish fisherman from Bethsaida, and the son of a man named Jonah or John, as noted in various gospel traditions. According to Christian tradition, the Franciscan Church of St. Peter in Capernaum, located on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, is built upon the historical site of Peter's family home, where Jesus is said to have healed Peter's mother-in-law. This account, found in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, strongly suggests that Peter was either married or widowed. Further evidence is seen in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 5, where Paul refers to apostles traveling with believing wives, implicitly affirming Peter's marital status. In the Gospels, Peter is portrayed as a working fisherman, laboring alongside his brother Andrew and the sons of Zebedee, James and John. Jesus encounters them by the Sea of Galilee and calls them to a higher purpose, to become fishers of men, Matthew 4 verse 19, Mark 1 verse 17. Peter's vocation as a fisherman continues to be symbolically referenced, including post-resurrection scenes in John's Gospel, where he leads the miraculous catch of 153 fish, a moment rich in theological symbolism and interpreted by many as a metaphor for his future apostolic mission. One of the most pivotal moments in the synoptic tradition is the confession of Peter at Caesarea Philippi, where Peter boldly declares Jesus to be the Christ, the Son of the living God. In response, Jesus gives Simon the Aramaic name Cephas, Greek, Petros, meaning rock, signifying his foundational role in the establishment of the church, Matthew 16 verse 18. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus uses Peter's boat to preach to the multitudes on the shore of Lake Gennesaret. After instructing Peter to lower his nets, a miraculous catch of fish follows, leading to Peter's humble acknowledgement of Jesus' divine authority. Moved by the encounter, Peter and his companions, James and John, immediately leave everything and follow him. The Gospel of John offers a slightly different sequence, where Peter is introduced to Jesus through his brother Andrew, a disciple of John the Baptist. Upon meeting Simon, Jesus immediately renames him Cephas, recognizing from the outset Peter's destined leadership. 3 of the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, recount the extraordinary episode of Jesus walking on water. Matthew alone records Peter stepping out in faith to walk toward Jesus on the sea, only to falter and begin to sink when overcome by fear, an image that poignantly illustrates Peter's impetuous nature and developing faith. At the Last Supper, another moment of deep symbolic meaning occurs when Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. Peter initially resists, refusing to allow his master to take the role of a servant. But when Jesus insists that participation in his mission requires this act of humility, Peter responds with characteristic fervor. "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." John 13, verse 9. This powerful scene continues to inspire Christian liturgy today, particularly in the Maundy Thursday observance, which reenacts the act of foot washing as a symbol of servant leadership and spiritual purification. Further accounts of St. Peter in Scripture and tradition. 3 of the 4 canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, recount the miraculous episode of Jesus walking on water. Matthew uniquely expands the account by describing how Peter, with a burst of bold faith, stepped out onto the waves to approach Jesus. Yet, as his confidence faltered, he began to sink, prompting Jesus to rescue him, an enduring symbol of the human struggle between faith and doubt. During the Last Supper, Jesus performed a profound act of humility by washing the feet of his disciples. Peter initially resisted, declaring it unthinkable that the Master should stoop to such a task. However, when Jesus replied, "If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me," Peter responded with characteristic fervor. "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." John 13, verse 9. This event laid the foundation for the Christian ritual of foot washing on Maundy Thursday, still practiced by several denominations, as a symbol of servant leadership and spiritual cleansing. All 3 synoptic Gospels report that during Jesus' arrest, one of his disciples drew a sword and severed the ear of the high priest's servant. The Gospel of John specifically identifies Peter as the assailant and names the injured servant as Malchus. Only Luke adds a remarkable detail, that Jesus healed the servant's ear on the spot, a final act of compassion and divine power, marking the last of the 37 recorded miracles of Christ in the New Testament. Peter's role as a fearless preacher and leader is further affirmed in the Acts of the Apostles, where he and John were twice brought before the Sanhedrin and boldly defied their orders to remain silent about Jesus. Peter's missionary journeys took him through Lydda, Joppa, and Caesarea. At Joppa, he received a transformative vision from God, permitting the consumption of what was once considered ritually unclean food. This vision served as a metaphor for a broader theological breakthrough, the inclusion of Gentiles in the Christian message. Peter's meeting with Cornelius the centurion, a non-Jewish believer, solidified this shift, as he declared, "God shows no partiality." Peter and John were also sent from Jerusalem to Samaria to continue the work of evangelism. In Paul's epistle to the Galatians, Peter, Cephas, is mentioned as having met Paul in Jerusalem during Paul's early ministry. Later, Paul recounts a second meeting, this time accompanied by Barnabas and Titus, during which doctrinal unity was affirmed. However, Paul also notes a moment of sharp confrontation in Antioch, where he opposed Peter to his face, accusing him of inconsistency regarding Jewish and Gentile relations, evidence of the complex dynamics of early church leadership. Acts 12 records Peter's imprisonment in Jerusalem under Herod Agrippa I, reigned AD 41 to 44, followed by his miraculous escape through the intervention of an angel of the Lord. After his release, Peter left Jerusalem for an undisclosed location, and the canonical texts offer no continuous narrative of his subsequent movements. However, scattered references and early church writings provide glimpses into isolated episodes of his later ministry. Peter's wife. Although the Synoptic Gospels confirm that Peter had a mother-in-law, implying he was married at the time of his call to discipleship, the canonical texts remain silent about his wife's identity or fate. The early Christian writer Clement of Alexandria later claimed that Peter's wife was martyred for her faith, enduring execution at the hands of Roman authorities, a testament to the family's shared commitment to Christ, though Clement provides no specific details regarding time or place. Some traditions suggest Peter may have been widowed by the time he encountered Jesus, though this remains speculative due to the lack of concrete historical evidence. Peter, first leader of the early church. The Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles consistently present Peter as the most prominent figure among the 12 apostles. Although he famously denied Jesus 3 times during the events surrounding the crucifixion, Christian tradition holds that Peter was also the first disciple to whom the risen Christ appeared, an act seen as both a personal restoration and a divine reaffirmation of his leadership. This pivotal moment laid the theological foundation for apostolic succession and the enduring institutional authority of the church, which identifies Peter as the rock upon which the church will be built. Matthew 16, verse 18. Peter is universally regarded as the first leader of the early Christian church, a role initially recognized and respected by the apostolic community. However, within the Jerusalem church, his leadership was later complemented, if not partially eclipsed, by James the Just, the so-called brother of the Lord, who emerged as a central authority figure in the mother church of Jerusalem. Despite this shift, Peter's foundational role remained intact, serving as the symbolic and spiritual cornerstone of Christian orthodoxy. Throughout the Gospels, Peter is consistently listed first whenever the names of the apostles appear, e.g., Matthew 10 verse 2, Mark 3 verse 16, Luke 6 verse 14, Acts 1 verse 13, indicating his precedence and primacy. Together with James the Elder and John, he formed an inner circle, an apostolic triumvirate, granted exclusive access to 3 of the most intimate and revelatory moments in Jesus' public ministry: the raising of Jairus' daughter, the Transfiguration, and the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. These privileged experiences not only deepened Peter's spiritual understanding, but reinforced his central role in the unfolding gospel narrative. Peter frequently acts as the spokesman for the apostles, voicing their questions, confessions, and fears. His bold confession of Jesus as the Messiah marks a climactic turning point in the Synoptic Gospels. As Catholic scholar John Vidmer notes, Catholic scholars agree that Peter had an authority that superseded that of the other apostles. He conducts the election of Matthias, leads public preaching, performs miracles, and plays a decisive role in major theological debates, particularly regarding the inclusion of the Gentiles. The Acts of the Apostles, traditionally attributed to Luke, portrays Peter as the undisputed central figure in the early Christian movement, preaching at Pentecost, confronting religious authorities, performing healings, and shaping the doctrinal direction of the church. From Jerusalem to Joppa, from Caesarea to Antioch, Peter's leadership and witness served as the backbone of the apostolic era and remains a defining element of Christian identity and ecclesial structure. The denial of Jesus by Peter. All 4 canonical Gospels solemnly recount the prophetic warning given by Jesus during the Last Supper, foretelling that Peter would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed, a poignant moment underscoring human frailty even in the closest of disciples. While Mark's account uniquely states, before the cock crows twice, the essence remains consistent across the Synoptic Gospels and John's narrative. The 3 denials unfold with increasing tension. 1. The first denial occurs when a female servant of the high priest identifies Simon Peter as a follower of Jesus. In Mark's account, though absent from some manuscripts, this is followed by the rooster's crow. Luke and John add vivid detail. Peter is warming himself by a fire among a crowd, Luke describing him as sitting, John as standing, heightening the sense of isolation and vulnerability. 2. The second denial transpires as Peter moves to the gateway, away from the firelight. Here, the accusation is renewed. Mark and Matthew recount a servant girl's recognition, while Luke introduces a man's accusation. John, differing slightly, places this denial still near the fire, followed by a third denial outside near the garden, where Peter is identified by another witness. The rooster's crow again punctuates this moment, signaling the mounting pressure on Peter. 3. The final denial is marked by the recognition of Peter's distinctive Galilean accent, which betrays his identity as a disciple of Jesus. Matthew explicitly notes the accent as the key evidence, while Luke narrows the accuser to a third individual rather than a crowd. John's Gospel omits mention of the accent, but aligns the denial with the arrest scene in the garden. This climactic denial is immediately followed by the unmistakable crowing of the rooster, fulfilling Jesus' prophecy. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus' forewarning to Peter is poignant and deeply personal. "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." This prophetic intercession underscores the gravity of Peter's trial and the promise of restoration. This restoration is powerfully echoed in the epilogue of John's Gospel, where Peter affirms his love for Jesus 3 times, mirroring the 3 denials and symbolizing forgiveness, renewal, and the reinstatement of Peter's leadership within the nascent church. Resurrection appearances of Jesus to Peter. The first epistle to the Corinthians, authored by the Apostle Paul, provides one of the earliest written attestations of the resurrection appearances of Jesus, explicitly naming Peter as the first to behold the risen Christ. This early tradition, which Paul preserves, highlights Peter's primacy as the inaugural witness to the resurrection, a status that notably does not fully carry over into the later gospel narratives. In the Gospel of John, Peter is depicted as the first disciple to enter the empty tomb, though the women followers and the beloved disciple arrive and observe the sight prior to him. Meanwhile, Luke's Gospel portrays a contrasting scene, where the apostles initially dismiss the women's testimony of the empty tomb, leaving Peter as the sole disciple compelled to investigate personally. He runs to the tomb, observes the grave clothes, and then departs quietly, an ambiguous reaction that speaks to the profound impact of the resurrection's reality. A profound moment of restoration and commissioning unfolds in the closing chapter of John's Gospel. In a symbolic reversal of his earlier triple denial, Peter is thrice invited by the risen Jesus to affirm his love. Each confession strengthens Peter's reaffirmed vocation and leadership role, with Jesus explicitly reinstating Peter's charge to feed my sheep, thereby reaffirming his supreme pastoral authority. The Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, situated on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, stands as the traditional site commemorating this pivotal post-resurrection appearance. According to Catholic tradition, this event not only underscores the resurrection's transformative power, but also marks the formal establishment of Peter's supreme jurisdiction and foundational role over the universal Christian Church. The Rock Dialogue, foundation of the Church. In a defining moment recorded in Matthew 16 verses 13 to 19, Jesus engages his disciples in a profound dialogue. "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" After hearing various responses, he turns the question directly to his disciples. "But who do you say that I am?" It is Simon Peter who boldly confesses, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." To this declaration, Jesus delivers a monumental pronouncement. "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Cephas, Peter, Petros, and on this rock, Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." This passage has long served as the theological cornerstone of Peter's unique role in the foundation and authority of the Church. Jesuit scholar Father Daniel J. Harrington offers a compelling perspective, portraying Peter as an unlikely yet powerful symbol of stability. Though Peter is among the first called disciples and serves frequently as their spokesman, he epitomizes the struggles of little faith. He is the disciple whom Jesus gently rebukes in Matthew 14 with, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" and who famously denies Christ 3 times during the Passion. In the light of the resurrection, however, Peter becomes the quintessential exemplar of the forgiven sinner, demonstrating the transformative power of divine mercy and restoration. Interpretations of this passage, particularly concerning the nature and extent of authority bestowed upon Peter, vary significantly beyond the Catholic tradition. The Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, emphasizes that Jesus' words do not confer exclusive primacy upon Peter as an individual, but rather highlight his role as a representative figure among the apostles. Linguistically, the Greek term Petra, translated as rock, is understood as a small outcropping or detachment of a larger rock formation, rather than a massive boulder. Accordingly, Orthodox sacred tradition interprets this as a reference to the collective apostolic faith and foundation, rather than a personal office. The name Petros, while not previously common, gained widespread popularity in the Greek-speaking Christian communities, becoming emblematic of Peter's pivotal place within early church history and theology. Apostolic succession, the enduring foundation of ecclesial authority. The leadership of Peter serves as the foundational cornerstone for the doctrine of apostolic succession, the unbroken transmission of spiritual authority from the apostles to their successors, ensuring the continuity and institutional integrity of Orthodox Christianity. Peter is vividly described as the rock upon which the church is irrevocably built, symbolizing both strength and steadfastness in faith. Within this framework, the Catholic Church venerates Peter as the chief of the apostles, a primacy echoed and respected by the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox traditions. In the liturgical rites of the Coptic Orthodox Church, Peter is honored as prominent or head among the apostles, a distinction he shares with Paul, reflecting their unique roles in the establishment and expansion of the early church, as celebrated in the fraction of fast and feast of the apostles Peter and Paul. While these traditions affirm Peter's eminent leadership, many, including the Orthodox churches, carefully distinguish this honor from any assertion that the other apostles were subordinate to Peter's direct command. Instead, Peter's primacy is understood as a position of spiritual honor and unity, a pivotal role within the collegial and apostolic leadership that safeguarded the church's mission and doctrinal purity through the centuries. Peter in Antioch and Corinth, foundations of early Christian leadership. According to the Epistle to the Galatians 2:11, Peter's mission extended to Antioch, where he faced a public rebuke from Paul for adopting a conservative stance regarding the inclusion of Gentile converts, evidenced by his practice of withdrawing from shared meals with Gentiles. Despite this tension, early Christian tradition firmly establishes Peter as the first patriarch of Antioch, a pivotal center of early Christianity. Esteemed church fathers such as Origen and Eusebius, in his seminal church history, Book 3, Chapter 36, affirmed that Peter founded the Church of Antioch, laying the groundwork for its spiritual and organizational development. Later ecclesiastical records, including the Liber Pontificalis, 9th century, expand upon this legacy, noting Peter's service as Bishop of Antioch for 7 years. Some traditions even suggest he left his family behind in this ancient Greek city prior to his eventual journey to Rome. Remarkably, claims of direct bloodline descent from Simon Peter persist among certain Semon families in modern-day Syria and Lebanon, underscoring the enduring cultural and historical imprint of Peter's presence in Antioch. Historical scholarship continues to uncover evidence supporting Peter's sojourn and influence in the region. The Clementine literature, a corpus of writings dating from the 4th century, yet believed to preserve earlier traditions, provides further insight into Peter's ministry. These texts describe a devoted band of 12 to 16 followers under Peter's leadership and offer a detailed itinerary of his travels from Caesarea Maritima to Antioch. Notably, they recount Peter's debate with the heretic Simon Magus and his ordination of Zacchaeus as the first bishop of Caesarea and Maro as the first bishop of Tripolis. Scholar Fred Lapham suggests that this itinerary may derive from an earlier document referenced by Epiphanius of Salamis in his Panarion, known as the Itinerary of Peter. Together, these traditions and historical attestations underscore Peter's instrumental role in shaping the early Christian communities of Antioch and beyond, establishing ecclesial authority and doctrinal foundations that would reverberate throughout the centuries. Peter in Corinth, Apostolic Mission and Founding Legacy. Historical and scriptural evidence suggests that Peter may have visited the ancient city of Corinth, an important center of early Christianity in Greece. The first epistle to the Corinthians hints at the presence of a distinct group or faction known as the Party of Cephas, indicating Peter's influence within the Corinthian Christian community during the apostolic missions. Supporting this tradition, Dionysius, the bishop of Corinth, writing in his epistle to the Roman Church under Pope Soter, circa AD 165 to 174, explicitly affirms that both Peter and Paul were foundational architects of the churches in Rome and Corinth. Dionysius testifies that Peter and Paul not only planted and nurtured these vibrant Christian communities, but also lived in Corinth for an extended period before continuing their ministry in Italy, where they ultimately faced martyrdom together. He writes, "You have thus by such an admonition bound together the planting of Peter and of Paul at Rome and Corinth. For both of them planted and likewise taught us in our Corinth. And they taught together in like manner in Italy, and suffered martyrdom at the same time." This testimony underscores the profound and intertwined apostolic legacy of Peter and Paul, highlighting their unified mission to establish and guide key centers of early Christianity. Peter's reputed presence in Corinth further exemplifies his expansive pastoral reach and enduring role as a cornerstone in the foundation of the universal church. Peter and the primacy of Rome. Foundations of the papacy. The Catholic Church holds that the Pope, as the Bishop of Rome, is a legitimate successor of St. Peter, affirming a direct and unbroken line of apostolic authority. While this tradition often implies that Peter himself was the first Bishop of Rome, it is important to recognize that the institution of the papacy transcends the precise historical question of Peter's episcopal status, or even his physical presence in Rome. The primacy of the Roman See is rooted fundamentally in Peter's unique role as the foundational rock of the Church. The early Church Father Irenaeus of Lyons, in his seminal work Against Heresies, circa 180 AD, explicitly identifies Linus as Peter's immediate successor and acknowledges him as the second Bishop of Rome. This succession is recognized by the Catholic Church, which traces the line of popes from Linus through a continuous and historic episcopate, including figures such as Anacletus, Clement of Rome, and others who shepherded the Church through its formative centuries. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, in his church history, corroborates this succession by noting Linus's role as Peter's episcopal heir in Rome. As to the rest of his followers, Paul testifies that Crescens was sent to Gaul, but Linus, whom he mentions in the second epistle to Timothy as his companion at Rome, was Peter's successor in the episcopate of the church there, as has already been shown. Eusebius of Caesarea, Church History, Book 3, Chapter 4. Further testament to Peter's foundational authority is found in Tertullian's prescription against heretics, where he affirms that Clement of Rome was ordained by Peter as bishop, solidifying the continuity of apostolic leadership in the Roman Church, as also the Church of Rome, which makes Clement to have been ordained in like manner by Peter. Tertullian, Prescription Against Heretics, Chapter 32. Saint Clement of Rome himself venerates Peter and Paul as the paramount heroes of the Christian faith, underscoring their irreplaceable legacy as the twin pillars upon which the Church's apostolic authority and spiritual mission were built. Peter's arrival in Rome. Historical and patristic testimony. While the New Testament does not provide explicit evidence of Peter's presence in Rome, there are significant textual and traditional indications supporting this pivotal chapter in his ministry. Notably, the first epistle of Peter references the church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, saluteth you. And so doth Marcus my son, a phrase widely understood by scholars to metaphorically denote Rome. Babylon serving as a cryptic designation in Jewish and early Christian literature, especially following the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70. Intriguingly, Paul's epistle to the Romans, circa AD 57, warmly greets approximately 50 members of the Roman Christian community by name, yet Peter is conspicuously absent from this list. Likewise, during Paul's extended 2-year stay in Rome, as recorded in Acts 28, around AD 60 to 62, there is no direct mention of Peter's presence or interaction, though the account leaves unspecified the identities of Paul's visitors. Turning to the patristic witnesses, the early church fathers provide compelling affirmation of Peter's ministry in Rome. The first-century Father Ignatius of Antioch, c. 35 to 107, references Peter and Paul jointly issuing admonitions to the Roman faithful, strongly implying Peter's active role in the city's ecclesial life. In the 2nd century, Irenaeus of Lyons, c. 130 to 202, explicitly attests that Peter and Paul were the founders of the Roman Church and appointed Linus as Peter's episcopal successor. Similarly, Clement of Alexandria, c. 150 to 215, records that Peter preached publicly in Rome, cementing his pastoral and evangelical presence. The testimonies of Origen, 184 to 253, and Eusebius of Caesarea further reinforce this tradition, describing how Peter, after founding the church at Antioch, journeyed to Rome where he presided as its bishop until his martyrdom. Following Peter's tenure in Antioch, leadership passed to Evodius and then to Ignatius, a disciple of John the Apostle. Finally, Lactantius, writing circa 318 in Of the Manner in which the persecutors died, vividly portrays Peter's ministry under Emperor Nero's reign, highlighting how Peter, empowered by divine grace, performed miracles and converted many, thus establishing a firm and enduring spiritual foundation, the faithful and steadfast temple unto the Lord, in the heart of the Roman Empire. Together, these scriptural nuances and authoritative patristic accounts underscore Peter's profound role as the seminal leader of the early Roman Church, affirming his enduring legacy as the rock upon which the Christian faith was built. Simon Magus and Peter's confrontation, triumph of apostolic authority. The early church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, circa 260 to 340 AD, records a dramatic encounter between Peter and the heretical figure Simon Magus in Judea, as referenced in Acts 8. Following this confrontation, Simon fled to Rome, where he initially gained a troubling reputation, being venerated by some Romans as a divine figure. Yet, Eusebius recounts that Simon's fleeting ascendancy was decisively ended by the arrival of Peter, sent by God himself to Rome. There, Peter confronted Simon, whose influence was swiftly extinguished, and his heresy brought to ruin by the power of true apostolic authority. Supporting this account, Jerome, 327 to 420 AD, affirms that Peter arrived in Rome during the 2nd year of Emperor Claudius's reign specifically to challenge and overthrow Simon Magus. Jerome further attests that Peter maintained his episcopal ministry in Rome for 25 years, culminating in the 14th year of Emperor Nero's reign, thus solidifying his role as the steadfast shepherd combating falsehood and heresy. An apocryphal yet influential text, the Actus Vercellenses, a Latin manuscript dating from the 7th century and commonly published under the title Acts of Peter, also situates this confrontation within Rome, dramatizing Peter's pivotal role in confronting and overcoming the dangerous threat posed by Simon Magus. Together, these accounts portray a powerful narrative of divine intervention and apostolic victory, affirming Peter as the indomitable defender of orthodoxy against early heretical challenges, and underscoring his foundational role in establishing and safeguarding the true church in the heart of the Roman Empire. Death and burial of St. Peter, martyrdom and legacy. The Gospel of John's epilogue contains a poignant allusion to Peter's impending fate, as Jesus foretells. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. This prophetic statement is widely interpreted as a veiled reference to Peter's martyrdom by crucifixion, while some, such as theologian Donald Fay Robinson, propose that the account in Acts 12 verses 1 to 17, where Peter is miraculously freed from prison, may symbolize an idealized narrative of his death. Other traditions firmly locate Peter's martyrdom in Rome. According to early Christian tradition, Peter was crucified with outstretched arms during the aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, an event that Emperor Nero notoriously blamed on the Christian community. This martyrdom, occurring approximately 3 months after the catastrophic fire and coinciding with the 10th anniversary of Nero's accession to power, became emblematic of the brutal persecutions faced by early Christians. The site of Peter's execution is traditionally identified as Vatican Hill, where according to the apocryphal Acts of Peter, he was crucified upside down by his own request, out of humility, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. Peter's burial place is believed to lie beneath the high altar of the Basilica of St. Peter, a sacred site that has become the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church. This connection between martyrdom and the physical foundation of the Church reinforces his enduring role as the rock upon which Christianity was built. The early Christian writer Pope Clement I, circa 80 to 98 AD, memorializes Peter's steadfast witness in his letter to the Corinthians. Through jealousy and envy, the greatest and most just pillars of the Church were persecuted and came even unto death. Peter, through unjust envy, endured many labors, and at last, having delivered his testimony, departed unto the place of glory due to him. The moving, apocryphal narrative of Quo Vadis, Domini? Latin, Where are you going, Lord? Preserved in the Acts of Peter and immortalized in art and tradition, recounts how Peter, fleeing Rome to escape martyrdom, encounters the risen Christ. When Peter asks where Jesus is going, he replies, I am going to Rome to be crucified again. This encounter inspires Peter to return courageously to Rome and embrace his martyrdom. Other patristic authorities underscore the manner and place of Peter's death. Tertullian c. 155 to 240 testifies that Peter suffered a passion mirroring Christ's crucifixion in Rome, while Origen 184 to 253 describes Peter's death by inverted crucifixion, a symbol later echoed in the inverted cross of St. Peter. Jerome 327 to 420 affirms the tradition that Peter was crucified under Nero's reign, dying around AD 67 to 68 after a ministry spanning approximately 25 years in Rome. Though some modern scholarship debates precise dates and circumstances, the overwhelming historical and ecclesiastical consensus venerates Peter's death as the ultimate testimony of faith and leadership. His martyrdom, intertwined with the founding of the Roman Church and commemorated in sacred sites, remains a cornerstone of Christian identity and apostolic succession. Burial and veneration of St. Peter. Catholic tradition solemnly holds that St. Peter's martyrdom by inverted crucifixion took place in the gardens of Nero, with his sacred burial site located nearby in what is now known as St. Peter's Tomb. This revered location has been a focal point of Christian veneration for nearly 2 millennia. The early Christian writer Caius, in his disputation against Proclus, circa AD 198, as preserved by Eusebius, attests to the physical reality of these apostolic relics. I can point out the trophies of the apostles. For if you are willing to go to the Vatican or to the Austrian Way, you will find the trophies of those who founded this church. This testimony underlines the unbroken tradition associating Peter's burial with the Vatican Hill. Jerome, in his seminal work De Viris Illustribus, AD 392, affirms, Peter was buried at Rome in the Vatican near the Triumphal Way, where he is venerated by the whole world. The Liber Pontificalis corroborates this, recording Peter's burial on June 29th, a date which became the feast day commemorating the apostles' martyrdom. While some have speculated that this date might have been chosen to supplant a pre-existing Roman festival, historical evidence suggests its authenticity as a solemn day of remembrance. In the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine I profoundly honored Peter by commissioning a grand basilica over his tomb. The construction of this monumental church was no simple architectural endeavor. The steep and uneven slope of Vatican Hill had to be painstakingly excavated, foregoing easier alternatives on level ground to ensure the basilica's alignment with the apostolic burial site. This deliberate choice underscores the paramount importance of Peter's resting place in the Christian consciousness, outweighing logistical and even legal challenges such as the removal of existing cemeteries. The centerpiece of both the original Constantinian basilica and its later Renaissance reconstruction is the high altar, meticulously positioned directly above the precise location traditionally recognized as St. Peter's burial site. This altar stands not only as a sacred locus of worship, but as a powerful symbol of the unbroken apostolic foundation upon which the Roman Catholic Church is built. Relics of St. Peter. According to a letter cited by the Venerable Bede, in the year 665, Pope Vitalian sent a precious cross containing filings reputed to be from the chains of St. Peter to the Queen of Oswy, King of Northumbria. The Pope also dispatched unspecified relics of the apostle to the king himself, underscoring the significance of Peter's veneration across Christendom. Since at least the 9th century, the skull of St. Peter has been enshrined in the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, Rome's cathedral church, alongside that of St. Paul, reflecting the enduring reverence afforded to these two pillars of the early church. In 1950, during excavations beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, a cache of human bones was discovered. Many scholars and faithful alike have identified these remains as those of St. Peter himself. A challenge to this claim emerged in 1953, following an excavation in Jerusalem that uncovered a tomb marked with the name Simon, Peter's given name. Yet alongside it were tombs inscribed with the names Jesus, Mary, James, John, and other apostles, names exceedingly common among Jews of the first century, thus weakening the identification of the Jerusalem site as Peter's final resting place. Renewed investigation in the 1960s led to a landmark moment. The remains from beneath the Vatican altar were re-examined and found to belong to a man in his early 60s, consistent with the traditional age and period of Peter's martyrdom. In 1968, Pope Paul VI officially declared the relics to be, with moral certainty, those of the Apostle Peter. Decades later, on November 24, 2013, Pope Francis publicly displayed fragments of the relics for the first time during a Mass in St. Peter's Square, an unprecedented gesture of faith and continuity with the apostolic past. On July 2, 2019, in a historic and ecumenically significant act, Pope Francis transferred 9 of the bone fragments, enshrined in a bronze reliquary, to Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I of Constantinople. The Patriarch, the spiritual leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church, hailed the transfer as a brave and bold step toward the healing of centuries-old divisions between East and West. Pope Francis stated that the decision was born out of prayer and served as a tangible expression of his commitment to Christian unity. Despite the transfer, the majority of St. Peter's relics remain preserved beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the site revered for centuries as the heart of apostolic tradition. Many ecclesiastical historians affirm that both Peter and Paul were martyred during the reign of Emperor Nero, likely around AD 65, in the aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome. This view is shared by a significant number of modern Catholic scholars, as well as many independent historians, who accept the long-standing tradition that Peter met his martyrdom in Rome under Nero's persecution. However, while this tradition holds considerable weight, it is important to note that no contemporaneous historical sources confirm Peter held any formal episcopal office in the city. The claim of Peter's episcopacy in Rome faces serious scholarly scrutiny. Notably, German philologist Otto Zweierlein, in 2 influential studies published in 2009 and 2013, contends that there exists neither reliable literary documentation nor archaeological evidence to substantiate Peter's physical presence in Rome. Zweierlein's assertion that the tradition is constructed from later, theologically motivated narratives has sparked intense academic debate. His conclusions, however, have not gone unchallenged. Historian Timothy Barnes, for example, characterized Zweierlein's work as a nadir in historical criticism, suggesting it reflects an excessively skeptical and revisionist stance. One of the earliest sources cited in support of Peter's Roman presence is 1 Clement, a letter attributed to Clement of Rome, dated by scholars between the late 1st and early 2nd centuries. Though often used to support the tradition of Peter's martyrdom in Rome, the text neither specifies a location nor provides details beyond what is already known from the Acts of the Apostles. Zweierlein further challenges the authenticity and historical value of the document, arguing it offers no independent testimony about Peter's final days. Another oft-cited source is a letter attributed to Ignatius of Antioch, addressed to the Roman Church. This text appears to confer a unique spiritual authority on Peter and Paul, stating, "I do not command you, as Peter and Paul did." While traditionally dated to the early 2nd century, c. 105 to 110, Zweierlein disputes both its authenticity and its chronology, suggesting it may instead originate from the later decades of the 2nd century. He further argues that the passage in question could refer more broadly to the apostles' missionary activity or written correspondence, rather than indicating hierarchical or institutional authority within the Roman Church. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, documents the Roman practice of crucifying individuals in various positions for the entertainment of soldiers. This lends a measure of plausibility to the account in the Acts of Peter, which asserts that Peter was crucified upside down. Whether this detail reflects historical fact or literary embellishment remains uncertain. However, medical analysis suggests that crucifixion in an inverted position would likely not result in death by suffocation, the most common cause of death in standard crucifixions, highlighting the symbolic or theological intent behind such a portrayal. Rome as Babylon. Early church tradition attributes the epistles of 1st and 2nd Peter to the Apostle Peter, a claim echoed by the text of 2nd Peter, though widely disputed by modern scholarship. In 1 Peter, the author refers to being in Babylon, 1 Pet 5:13, a term many scholars and early Christian writers interpret as a symbolic reference to Rome. The association is reinforced by historical Christian sources, including Eusebius of Caesarea, who cites Clement of Alexandria and Papias of Hierapolis. They affirm that Peter composed his first epistle in Rome, and that the reference to Babylon is a deliberate metaphor. Eusebius notes, Clement of Alexandria, in the 6th book of the Hypotyposius, cites the tradition, and the Bishop Papias of Hierapolis supports it as well, stating that Peter referred to Mark in the first epistle, which they affirm was written in Rome, allegorically named Babylon. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. 1 Pet 5:13. If Babylon indeed refers to Rome, this constitutes the only direct biblical reference to Peter's presence there. Despite the weight of tradition, many biblical scholars contest Petrine authorship of both epistles, citing stylistic and theological differences, as well as portrayals in the Acts of the Apostles that depict Peter as an uneducated fisherman. Nonetheless, a broad scholarly consensus affirms that Babylon in this context operates as a veiled reference to the Roman Empire during its brutal persecution of early Christians, well before the Edict of Milan in 313. The metaphor is rich with historical and theological significance, encapsulating the empire's oppressive paganism, moral decadence, and violent imperialism. Lutheran theologian Kragar Kester notes that the horror of Babylon is Rome, yet more than Rome, it is the Roman imperial world, which in turn represents a world alienated from God. At the time the epistle was composed, the literal city of Babylon in Mesopotamia had fallen into ruin. Ancient sources, such as Strabo, describe it as largely uninhabited and desolate. This strengthens the case for symbolic interpretation. An alternative theory posits that Babylon might refer to the Egyptian Babylon, a Roman fortress near modern Cairo. This interpretation is bolstered by the mention of Mark in the epistle, traditionally regarded as the founder of the Church of Alexandria. Some scholars thus argue that 1 Peter may have originated in Egypt, reflecting a different geographical and ecclesiastical context than traditionally assumed. Feast Days of the Apostle Peter. The Universal Church honors the memory of Saints Peter and Paul on June 29th, a date appointed in the Roman martyrology for the joint celebration of their martyrdom, not necessarily as the precise day of their deaths, but as a solemn commemoration of their shared witness to Christ. St. Augustine of Hippo profoundly reflected on their unity in his Sermon 295, stating, "One day is assigned for the celebration of the martyrdom of the two apostles. But those two were one. Although their martyrdom occurred on different days, they were one." This feast is celebrated not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but also holds prominence in the liturgical calendar of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Within the Roman Rite, the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter is observed on February 22nd, commemorating the apostolic authority conferred upon him. Furthermore, on November 18th, the Church marks the anniversary of the dedication of the two great papal basilicas, St. Peter's in the Vatican and St. Paul's outside the walls. Prior to the reforms of Pope John XCI in 1960, the Roman calendar also included a separate commemoration on January 18th, designated as the Chair of St. Peter in Rome, distinct from the February feast, which was known as the Chair of St. Peter at Antioch. Additionally, the Feast of St. Peter in Chains was observed on August 1st, recalling his miraculous liberation from prison, as narrated in Acts 12. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, every Thursday throughout the liturgical year is dedicated to the Holy Apostles, with special veneration given to St. Peter. 3 notable feast days are observed in his honor. January 16th, veneration of the precious chains of the holy and all-glorious Apostle Peter, commemorating both the miraculous falling of the chains described in Acts and the chains borne by Peter before his martyrdom under Nero. June 29th, Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a major solemnity preceded by the Apostles' Fast, a period of spiritual preparation and ascetic discipline. June 30th, Synaxis of the holy, glorious, and all-praised 12 Apostles, celebrating the collective mission and legacy of the 12. In the Anglican tradition, the Church of England observes a festival in honor of Saints Peter and Paul on June 29th. Peter may also be commemorated individually on this date, underscoring his unique role in the foundation of the Church. Primacy of Peter. The question of the precise significance of Peter's ministry remains a focal point of theological divergence among Christian traditions, reflecting profound differences in ecclesiology and authority. In the Catholic tradition, Peter is unequivocally recognized as the first bishop of Rome and, by extension, the inaugural pope. The Catholic Church hold that Christ conferred upon Peter a unique pastoral authority, an unbroken apostolic foundation that establishes the Pope's supreme jurisdiction over the universal Church. This primacy is rooted not only in Scripture, but is also upheld and transmitted through sacred tradition. Eastern Orthodox Christianity affirms a special primacy connected to Peter's ministry, yet this is understood strictly as a primacy of honor, rather than one of jurisdictional supremacy. The Orthodox view elevates Peter's successors with respect and precedence among the bishops, but rejects the notion of absolute authority over the entire Church as held by the papacy. Protestant perspectives generally reject any direct connection between Peter's apostolic work, including any ministry in Rome, and the institutional papacy. For many Protestant denominations, Peter's role remains foundational as an apostle, but does not translate into an enduring hierarchical office vested with universal authority. Historical scholarship further reflects a spectrum of interpretations regarding Peter's presence and role in Rome, often influenced by ecclesiastical traditions and textual analysis. Underscore 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 underscore. Catholic scriptural foundations for Peter's primacy. The Catholic understanding draws heavily on key biblical passages that underscore Peter's unique role among the apostles. John 21 verses 15 to 17. In this poignant post-resurrection dialogue, Jesus commands Peter threefold: feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, a charge interpreted by Catholic theology as a divine commissioning of Peter's pastoral and governing authority over Christ's flock. Matthew 10 verse 2. Here, Peter is identified as first Greek protos, a term rich with connotations of preeminence and foundational status, not merely numerical order. Matthew 16 verses 18 to 19, perhaps the most definitive text, where Jesus declares, "You are Peter Petros, and on this rock, Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." This passage has been seminal in articulating Peter's foundational role and the conferment of spiritual authority. underscore 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 underscore. Etymological and linguistic significance. The name Peter, Greek Petros, derives from the Aramaic Kepha, meaning rock. This nickname, given by Jesus himself, signifies Peter's role as the unshakable foundation of the church. Unlike a proper name, Kepha was a title of symbolic significance, emphasizing strength and steadfastness. Jesus' words in Matthew 16 employ a deliberate linguistic play, contrasting Petros, a small stone, with Petra, a massive rock, underscoring the enduring nature of the church's foundation in Peter's faith and leadership. The Syriac Peshitta preserves this symbolism in Aramaic, reiterating the foundational role of Kepha, Peter, upon which the church is built, resistant to the gates of Sheol death. Paul of Tarsus also affirms Peter's apostolic identity by using the appellation Cephas in his epistles, signaling early recognition of Peter's significance within the nascent Christian community. This multifaceted theological, historical, and linguistic framework forms the bedrock of the Catholic doctrine of Peter's primacy, shaping centuries of ecclesiastical structure and doctrine. Interpretation of Matthew 16 verse 18. To grasp the profound meaning behind Christ's declaration in Matthew 16 verse 18, the insights of St. Basil provide crucial clarity. Though Peter is a rock, he is not a rock like Christ himself, who is the true and immovable rock. Rather, Peter is made steadfast and unmovable by Christ, the rock. Jesus imparts his dignities to others without diminishing himself. He is the light, yet also makes others lights. He is the priest, yet ordains priests. He is the rock, and he makes Peter a rock. St. Basil de Poenitentia. This theological foundation is vividly symbolized in the papal fisherman's ring, bearing the image of Peter casting nets from a boat, recalling his original vocation as a fisherman called to become a fisher of men. The keys, emblematic of the Pope's authority, echo the keys of the kingdom of heaven, entrusted to Peter, a commission unmistakably parallel to the prophetic office of Eliakim ben Hilkiah in Isaiah 22 verses 15 to 23. Artistic depictions in both Eastern and Western Christian traditions consistently portray Peter wielding these keys, underscoring his unique role as guardian and steward of divine authority. The original Greek text distinguishes Peter, Paitar Omicron Petros, from rock, Paitar Alpha, Petra, a nuanced wordplay characteristic of Jesus' teaching style. More importantly, since Jesus likely addressed Peter in Aramaic, both terms would have been Kepha, reinforcing Peter's identity as the foundational rock of the church. The Syriac Peshitta and Old Syriac manuscripts confirm this linguistic unity, and Paul's own epistles refer to Peter as Cephas, affirming this apostolic identity. Peter's leadership role is further underscored in the Acts of the Apostles, where he emerges as the pivotal figure among the early Christian community, charged with strengthening the brethren. Early church fathers, including St. John Chrysostom, interpreted the rock of Matthew 16 not only as Peter personally, but also as the confession of faith he professed, and by extension, the entire apostolic foundation and church. This layered double meaning remains central to the Catholic catechism today. Opponents from Protestant traditions often challenge the Catholic interpretation by emphasizing the lexical distinction between Petros and Petra, arguing that Peter signifies a mere pebble, while rock signifies Christ himself or the faith Peter confessed. However, such claims overlook the linguistic context of Koine Greek, the lingua franca of the New Testament, where Petros can signify a substantial rock, as attested by secular and scriptural usage. For example, Apollonius Rhodius, writing in Koine Greek, used Petros to denote a massive boulder. Moreover, the feminine noun Petra is scripturally applied to Christ himself, as in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 4, where he is described as the spiritual rock providing life to the faithful. While the passage of Matthew 16 verse 18 serves as a foundational text for the Catholic doctrine of papal primacy, It is noteworthy that prior to the Reformation, explicit appeals to this verse in support of papal supremacy were comparatively rare. Early references, such as those by Stephen of Rome and Pope Damasus, emerged in the context of theological controversies emphasizing centralized ecclesiastical authority. The prevailing interpretation among many early and medieval theologians was that the rock signified either Christ himself or Peter's faith, the profound confession that Jesus is the Son of God, rather than Peter's person alone. Nonetheless, a substantial number of church fathers drew a direct connection between Matthew 16 verse 18 and Peter's primacy, highlighting his unique role in the church. Tertullian famously declared, "The Lord said to Peter, 'On this rock I will build my church. I have given you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind or loose on earth will be bound or loosed in heaven.' Upon you," he says, "I will build my church, and I will give to you the keys, not to the church." This authoritative tradition firmly establishes Peter, and by extension his successors, as the foundational rock upon which the church's unity, authority, and mission rest. Paul's epistles and the debate over Peter's primacy. Paul's epistle to the Romans, composed around AD 57, offers a fascinating glimpse into the early Christian community in Rome, naming some 50 believers, but notably omitting any mention of Peter, despite Paul's acquaintance with him. Furthermore, during Paul's documented 2-year stay in Rome, as recorded in Acts 28, there is no recorded interaction with Peter. This silence has fueled ongoing scholarly debate concerning Peter's presence and role in Rome. Many church historians agree that both Peter and Paul were martyred during Emperor Nero's reign, around AD 64 to 68, but the precise historical details remain contested. Among Protestant theologians, especially confessional Lutherans, there is strong resistance to Catholic interpretations of Matthew 16 verse 18 and the concept of Petrine primacy. Leading critics like Carl Keating and D.A. Carson have argued against any lexical distinction between the Greek words Petros and Petra. However, Lutheran scholars counter this, citing authoritative Koine Greek lexicons, including the Bauer-Danker-Arndt Gingrich lexicon, that distinctly recognize the difference in meaning between these terms. They affirm deep respect for Peter as a foundational apostle, with some churches even bearing his name, yet emphatically reject the notion of Peter as the first pope or as the originator of a Roman hierarchical structure. Rather, they emphasize that Peter's writings affirm the priesthood of all believers, and that the keys promised to Peter in Matthew 16 are extended to the entire church community in Matthew 18. Oscar Cullmann, a distinguished Lutheran theologian and church historian, provides a nuanced perspective. He accepts the original Aramaic meaning of Kepha as rock, affirming that Christ's words clearly designated Peter as the foundational figure among the apostles. Yet, Cullmann firmly rejects the Catholic doctrine of an unbroken papal succession originating with Peter, arguing that Peter's life offers no historical foundation for such a chain of ecclesiastical authority. While fully acknowledging the authenticity and theological validity of the Matthew passage, he insists it cannot be used as a warrant for the papal office or primacy. Other Protestant scholars defend elements of the Catholic position regarding the rock, highlighting that the Gospel of Matthew was composed in Hellenistic Koine Greek, a dialect where the words Petros and Petra are not significantly different in meaning. Even in classical Attic Greek, the masculine Petros could denote a large stone or boulder, not merely a pebble, as evidenced by literary examples such as Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus. These linguistic insights render the common Protestant argument about a rigid distinction between Peter and rock linguistically and contextually weak. Furthermore, the feminine noun Petra could not have functioned as a personal name in Greek, explaining the practical use of Petros to render the Aramaic Kepha. Some Protestant scholars concede that Jesus indeed singled out Peter as the very rock upon which his church would be built, but argue this does not imply a perpetual institutional succession. They focus on the Greek demonstrative pronoun taught this very, combined with the conjunction kai, and to assert that the rock must be understood as Peter himself, not an abstract concept or faith alone. Confessional Lutherans and many Protestant apologists reject appeals to the Aramaic language as irrelevant for doctrinal interpretation, noting that while Jesus likely spoke Aramaic in private, Greek was the lingua franca of public discourse in the first century Mediterranean world. The New Testament itself was composed in Koine Greek, the authoritative language for Christian doctrine and scripture. Historical records indicate that even within the Catholic Church, the unanimous identification of Peter as the rock was not universally accepted until well into the 19th century. At the First Vatican Council in 1870, when papal infallibility was dogmatically defined, cardinals expressed a wide range of interpretations of Matthew 16 verse 18, some seeing Christ as the rock, others the apostolic college, some Peter's faith, and others the entire body of believers. Yet the doctrine affirming Peter's primacy was maintained as dogma. This complex tapestry of linguistic, historical, and theological analysis underscores that the question of Peter's primacy and its implications for church authority remain a profound and contested issue in Christian thought, demanding both rigorous scholarship and careful ecclesial reflection. Eastern Orthodox understanding of Apostle Peter. The Eastern Orthodox Church venerates Apostle Peter alongside Apostle Paul as the preeminent apostles, acknowledging their unparalleled contributions to the foundation of the early church. Peter is also honored with the title Coryphaeus, literally choir director, or lead singer, emphasizing his role as a leading voice among the apostles. However, the Orthodox tradition firmly distinguishes this leadership as one of primacy of honor rather than supreme jurisdiction or unilateral authority over his fellow apostles. Orthodox theology carefully rejects any notion of Peter possessing extraordinary, singular authority over matters of faith or morals. The New Testament, from the Orthodox perspective, does not endorse an exclusive primacy for Peter, but instead portrays him as a prominent yet collegial figure within the apostolic community. At the pivotal Council of Jerusalem, Peter is understood to have spoken as one among equals, with the final judgment resting in the authoritative pronouncements of James, the brother of Jesus. This stands in contrast to the Catholic interpretation, which sees James' role as affirming and developing Peter's prior divine revelation concerning Gentile inclusion. Crucially, the Eastern Orthodox Church does not recognize the Bishop of Rome as the direct successor of St. Peter. While the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople maintains fraternal relations with Rome, sending delegations annually for the joint celebration of Saints Peter and Paul, the theological and ecclesiological divisions persist. The Ravenna document of 2007 reflects a nuanced agreement acknowledging Rome's historical status as protos, first among patriarchs, within the ancient church's hierarchy, a primacy understood as a position of honor conditioned upon ecclesial unity with the Orthodox Church. However, it underscores that interpretations of the scope and nature of this primacy varied widely in the first millennium and remain points of contention today. Regarding the oft-cited Christological declaration in Matthew 16 verse 18, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church," the Eastern Orthodox interpretation fundamentally diverges from Roman Catholic teaching. The Orthodox hold that the rock refers not to the person of Peter himself, but to the confession of faith he made in acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah and Son of God. This reading is supported by linguistic and grammatical analysis of the original Greek text, wherein the feminine demonstrative pronoun, tau phatou tau paidaro, upon this rock, is employed, which grammatically aligns with the faith or confession rather than the masculine name Peter. This theological nuance underscores the Orthodox conviction that the Church's foundation rests upon the faith in Christ, manifest in the apostolic witness collectively, rather than on a singular apostolic office. Syriac Orthodox Church. The fathers of the Syriac Orthodox Church have long provided a profound theological interpretation of the primacy of Apostle Peter, affirming his unique and foundational office within the early Christian community. Eminent Syriac theologians, such as Ephrem, Aphrahat, and Maruthas, stand as authoritative exponents of this ancient tradition, unequivocally recognizing Peter's special role. Rooted in the rich heritage of rabbinic symbolism, the Syriac fathers refer to Jesus as Kepha, rock, interpreting the Old Testament rock motif as a profound messianic symbol. When Christ bestowed the name Kepha upon Simon, he was not merely renaming him, but conferring participation in his very person and office. as the ultimate shepherd and rock, Christ appointed Simon as the chief shepherd of his flock, declaring that on this Kepha, he would build his church. Aphrahat articulates this conviction, seeing Kepha as another name for Jesus, with Simon granted the right and authority to bear it. The conferral of a name in this tradition signifies the transmission of the rights and authority inherent to the name-bearer. Aphrahat further draws typological parallels between Peter and the stone set up by Joshua son of Nun as a witness in Israel, declaring Simon Kepha the faithful witness among the nations. He interprets the miraculous provision of water from the rock Kepha by Moses as a foreshadowing of Simon Kepha's mission to carry Christ's teachings to the world. Ephraim echoes this theology, highlighting Peter's role as the foundation of the church while humbly shunning worldly honor, as celebrated in Syriac liturgical traditions. The primacy of Peter is thus not a mere theological abstraction, but a living, vital element of the Syriac Orthodox Church's faith, manifest in its liturgies and sacraments. Underscore 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 underscore. New Apostolic Church. The New Apostolic Church, which embraces the restoration of the apostolic ministry in contemporary times, upholds Apostle Peter as the first chief apostle, affirming his primacy as foundational to its ecclesiastical structure and spiritual authority. Underscore 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 underscore. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints recognizes Peter as the inaugural leader of the early Christian church following the resurrection of Jesus Christ. While affirming apostolic succession originating with Peter, the church decisively rejects the legitimacy of papal successors within the Roman Catholic hierarchy. Foundational to Latter-day Saint theology are recorded revelations in which the resurrected Peter appeared to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in 1829 near Harmony Township, Pennsylvania, conferring upon them the apostleship and the keys of the kingdom, thereby initiating the restoration of priesthood authority. In interpreting Matthew 16 verses 13 to 19, prominent Latter-day Saint leader Bruce R. McConkie articulated that the things of God are known only by the power of His Spirit, identifying the rock of Christ's declaration as the rock of divine revelation itself. McConkie emphasized that revelation, pure, perfect, and personal, is the unshakable foundation upon which the Lord builds His church and kingdom, positioning this ongoing, living revelation as central to the faith and identity of Mormonism. Non-Christian perspectives on Apostle Peter. Judaism. Within ancient Jewish tradition, Simon Peter is seen as a pivotal figure strategically integrated into the early Christian movement by the decision of the rabbis. Concerned that nascent Christianity's close affinity to Judaism might cause it to be mistaken for merely a sect within Judaism, Peter was appointed to rise within the early Christian ranks, tasked with guiding the formation of a distinct religious identity. Despite his leadership role, tradition holds that Peter remained a practicing Jew and is traditionally credited with authoring the Venerable Nishma's Prayer, a profound element of Jewish liturgy. Islam. In Islamic theology, Jesus, essay with Makron, is revered as a prophet of God, and the Quran acknowledges his disciples as faithful helpers, without naming them explicitly. Nonetheless, classical Islamic exegesis and Quranic commentaries identify Peter among these disciples. An enduring tradition recounts Peter's mission alongside two others to Antioch to preach and spread the message. Within Twelver Shia Islam, Peter is often seen as a symbolic parallel to Al-Ibn Abi Lib, regarded as the vicegerent to the Prophet Muhammad. Peter's role as the first leader of the early church is understood as a counterpart to Allah's position as the rightful successor to Muhammad, underscoring a shared theological motif of divinely appointed leadership. Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith upholds and venerates the primacy of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, interpreting his station as the rock, not merely as an individual honor, but as a foundational symbol of faith in Christ, as the Son of the living God. This confession of faith is regarded as the bedrock upon which the Church and the law of God itself were established. In the writings of Baha'u'llah, the faith's prophet founder, Peter is frequently invoked as the rock, a spiritual beacon calling all followers toward divine truth and fulfillment. Baha'u'llah's eloquent exhortation in the summons of the Lord of hosts declares, "O followers of all religions, we behold you wandering, distraught in the wilderness of error. This is the day whereon the rock, Peter, crieth out and shouteth, and celebrateth the praise of its Lord, saying, Lo, the Father is come, and that which ye were promised in the kingdom is fulfilled." Ossetian mythology. In the rich tapestry of Ossetian myth, Peter's name, adorned with the prefix Dan, associated with water deities and rivers, was ascribed to Donbetter, the revered god of waters and the patron of fish and fishermen, highlighting a cultural assimilation of Peter's legacy beyond Christian contexts. Andean traditional medicine. The San Pedro cactus, Echinopsis bacanoi, long esteemed in Andean traditional medicine, bears the name of St. Peter, inspired by the belief that just as St. Peter holds the keys to heaven, the cactus's visionary effects grant users a transcendent experience akin to reaching heaven while still on earth. In 2022, the Peruvian Ministry of Culture formally recognized the ceremonial and medicinal use of the San Pedro cactus in northern Peru as an integral part of the nation's cultural heritage. Writings attributed to Apostle Peter. Traditionally, the Apostle Peter is credited with two canonical epistles, the first and second epistles of Peter, as well as several apocryphal works. However, scholarly consensus regarding the true authorship of these texts remains divided. New Testament epistles. The New Testament contains two letters ascribed to Peter, yet both exhibit a level of polished, urbane Greek that stands in stark contrast to the presumed linguistic abilities of an Aramaic-speaking fisherman, for whom Greek would have been a secondary or tertiary language. This linguistic sophistication, combined with notable theological divergences between the two epistles, has led a majority of biblical scholars to question whether both were penned by the same individual. Furthermore, the second epistle is notably absent from early patristic citations, casting additional doubt on its Petrine origin. Daniel B. Wallace, while advocating for Petrine authorship, acknowledges that the issue of authorship is already settled, at least negatively. The Apostle Peter did not write this letter, reflecting the dominant scholarly stance. Yet, he also concedes that the traditional attribution to Peter remains plausible when considering the combined internal and external evidence. The first epistle is widely regarded as the earlier of the two. To reconcile its elevated Greek style with Peter's background, many scholars posit that the letter was composed with the assistance of a secretary or amanuensis. Jerome, reflecting early ecclesiastical tradition, explained that the stylistic differences between the two epistles derive from Peter's use of different interpreters, thereby preserving the authenticity of both letters despite their divergent linguistic character. The letter's reference to Silvanus, a faithful brother, 1 Pet 5:12, has been interpreted by some as acknowledging the role of a secretary, though prominent scholars like Bart D. Ehrman argue this figure was more likely the letter-bearer rather than a scribe. The first epistle references a climate of official Roman persecution of Christians, corroborated by secular sources such as Tacitus and Suetonius, which traditionally has been linked to Nero's brutal crackdown following the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. Early church historians, including Eusebius, maintain that Peter was martyred during this period. Conversely, many contemporary scholars date the letter's composition to the reign of Emperor Domitian, AD 81 to 96, situating the persecution within the broader provinces of Asia Minor, Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, to which the letter is explicitly addressed. In contrast, the second epistle of Peter reveals textual dependence on the epistle of Jude and exhibits stylistic and thematic markers consistent with a later date, possibly as late as the mid-2nd century. The scholarly debate persists on the direction of influence between these two epistles. Early Christian writings, such as 2 Clement, bear striking resemblance to 2 Peter, and church fathers like Origen referenced it prior to AD 250, lending credence to a somewhat earlier origin. Jerome himself noted the differences in style and structure between the two epistles, attributing them to the use of different interpreters. Despite historical controversy, 2 Peter secured its canonical status only by the 4th century, after much debate, and remained excluded from some Eastern canons, such as the Syriac Orthodox, until the 6th century. The Gospel of Mark. Tradition attributes the Gospel of Mark to John Mark, a close associate and interpreter of Peter, thus positioning its content as a faithful reflection of Peter's eyewitness testimony. Eusebius, citing Papias, attests that Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately whatsoever he remembered, though not in strict chronological order. Mark's Gospel is therefore regarded as a carefully preserved record of Peter's preaching and perspective. Clement of Alexandria reinforces this tradition, noting that many requested Mark to document Peter's preaching in Rome, which he did under Peter's guidance. Likewise, Irenaeus affirms that Mark faithfully transmitted Peter's teachings after the martyrdom of both Peter and Paul. While the gospel text itself remains anonymous, these early attestations represent the most authoritative ancient testimony, linking the Gospel of Mark to Peter's first-hand witness and apostolic authority. Pseudepigrapha and apocryphal writings attributed to Peter. Beyond the canonical texts, a substantial body of apocryphal and pseudepigraphal literature has been ascribed to or centered on the Apostle Peter, reflecting his enduring theological and symbolic significance in early Christian traditions. Among these writings are the Gospel of Peter, a partially docetic narrative that survives only in fragmentary form, notable for its distinctive Christology and dramatic resurrection account. The Acts of Peter, detailing the apostles' missionary exploits and martyrdom. The Acts of Peter and Andrew, which explores the intertwined ministries of these two apostles. The Acts of Peter and Paul, chronicling joint apostolic ventures. The Acts of Peter and the 12, focusing on Peter's leadership among the apostolic circle. The Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, an esoteric text reflecting early Gnostic thought. A letter of Peter to Philip, preserved among the Nag Hammadi library manuscripts, offering unique theological insights. The Apocalypse of Peter, once widely regarded as authentic scripture by many Christian communities well into the 4th century. The Preaching of Peter, a 2nd century homiletic text, known only through surviving fragments. The Epistula Petri, an introductory letter attributed to Peter, serving as a prologue to certain versions of the Clementine literature. These writings, while non-canonical, testify to the profound impact and complex reception of Peter's legacy across diverse early Christian circles, spanning Orthodox, heterodox, and mystical traditions alike. Non-canonical sayings attributed to Peter. A number of non-canonical texts attribute distinctive sayings and dialogues to the Apostle Peter, reflecting the diversity and complexity of his portrayal in early Christian and Gnostic literature. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, 2 sayings are ascribed to Peter. One likens Jesus to a just messenger, while the other controversially records Peter urging Jesus to make Mary leave us, for females don't deserve life, highlighting early tensions regarding gender and authority. In the Apocalypse of Peter, Peter engages in a profound dialogue with Jesus concerning the parable of the fig tree and the ultimate fate of sinners, underscoring themes of judgment and eschatology. The fragmented Gospel of Mary reveals Peter's apparent jealousy toward Mary Magdalene, questioning her privileged access to Jesus with the words, "Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" This challenge is met by Levi's pointed rebuke, "Peter, you have always been hot-tempered," exposing interpersonal dynamics among the early disciples. Other apocryphal texts attributing sayings to Peter include the Secret Book of James and the Acts of Peter, each contributing to the multifaceted image of Peter in early Christian thought. The Fayum fragment, dated to the late 3rd century, contains a poignant prediction by Jesus of Peter's forthcoming triple denial before the cock crows, a narrative resonant with the canonical Gospels, particularly Mark. Whether this fragment represents an abridged version of the synoptic accounts or derives from an independent source, such as the apocryphal Gospel of Peter, remains a subject of scholarly debate. Notably, the fragmentary Gospel of Peter offers an alternative account of Jesus' death, diverging significantly from canonical narratives. While it provides scant detail on Peter himself, it records that upon discovering the empty tomb, I, Simon Peter, and Andrew my brother, took our fishing nets and went to the sea, reaffirming Peter's enduring identity as fisherman and disciple. Iconography of St. Peter. The earliest known portrait of St. Peter, discovered as recently as 2010, dates back to the 4th century, marking the inception of a rich visual tradition that has vividly shaped Christian art for centuries. 286. In classical iconography, Peter is consistently portrayed as a robust, somewhat stocky man with a face marked by a slightly combative expression, framed by a short beard and typically white or thinning hair, sometimes balding on top. This portrayal deliberately contrasts with that of the Apostle Paul, who is depicted with a longer beard, darker hair, and a leaner visage. Notably, Anglo-Saxon art presents an exception by often depicting Peter as beardless. Both apostles appear in this manner as early as the 4th century frescoes in the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter in Rome. 287. From the early 8th century onward, Peter's most enduring attribute, the large keys symbolizing the keys of the kingdom, begins to dominate his iconographic identity, frequently shown held in his hand or suspended from his belt. 288. This emblematic motif, a powerful symbol of spiritual authority and guardianship, remained a staple throughout the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and beyond. By the 15th century, Western depictions increasingly show Peter as balding on top, while Eastern Orthodox icons retain his full head of hair, reflecting divergent artistic and theological traditions. While the modern popular image of St. Peter as the literal gatekeeper of heaven is a familiar motif in secular culture, it finds little basis in traditional religious art. Instead, Peter is most often portrayed in heavenly courts as the foremost saint, positioned to the right of God, symbolically representing his preeminent role among the apostles. His presence pervades numerous narrative scenes drawn from the Gospels, frequently depicted standing closest to Christ. Iconographic highlights include the dramatic moment of the arrest of Christ, where Peter is portrayed severing the ear of a soldier, emblematic of his fervent loyalty and human impulsiveness. Beyond gospel narratives, Peter's iconography also encompasses poignant scenes from his own life and martyrdom. His miraculous rescue from prison, his trial, and notably, in Counter-Reformation art, the evocative depiction of Peter hearing the cock crow 3 times. This powerful imagery serves as a vivid symbol of repentance and renewal, reinforcing the theological foundation of the Catholic sacrament of confession and reconciliation. Through centuries of sacred art, St. Peter emerges not merely as a historical figure, but as an enduring symbol of faith, authority, and redemption. His image, a timeless testament to the unshakable rock upon which the Church is built, and the unwavering guardian of the spiritual gates that lead to eternal salvation.